Greetings to all you hopeless ampaholics out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's video. It's a part 2 of the K Model 720 bass amp video series. Okay, let's get a baseline sound check on this amp. It's right off the truck. Nothing's been done. It still has the 2-wire plug, the depth capacitor, the original dust still on the tubes. I have plugged it into my trusty current limiter over here on the right side so that if anything goes wrong, it will hopefully protect the circuit. As you will soon see, I haven't played the guitar since the last video was posted, so I'm out of practice, but I'm going to make enough noise that we're going to get an idea of what this thing sounds like as is. The tone control is at mid-range, which is 5 out of 10. The volume is at a little over 1/4. This is a fairly loud amp, and the guitar is at a 5 tone output out of 10. Okay, here's just a few chords. Well, I don't know how it sounded at home, but here it was kind of thin, kind of weak, treble intensive, very clear and clean, but no bass, not a lot of low mid-range. A little surprising for a bass amp to me. It sounds sort of like amps do when the output tubes are biased way too cold. Of course, we'll check on that. And it may well just be the absence of any cathode bypass capacitors in the circuit. We'll check that also. Okay, let's start taking this thing apart and seeing if we can't make it sound better. Before we look at the circuit, let's take a peek at the cabinet and see how it turned out. The stained grill cloth is still stained, but at least the baffle is held in now by 16 matching screws that are all pretty closely color matched to the grill cloth. The left-hand side, which was nearly perfect, still is. The top, which was real nice, came out fine, and those beer bottle rings, which I don't think were all that old, washed off. I think the main thing, besides of course the Elvis sticker, which has never looked better, is the right-hand side, which I think you recall was just heavily encrusted with mildew. About 2/3 of the Tolex was lifted up and heavily discolored, and I think you get a kick how it turned out. I tried to match the colors and texture and everything else, and yet not make it look too good so that it stood out. It's not perfect, but I think it's way better than it was. Now let's turn it around and take a look at the control panel and the rear. There's been some Tolex touch-ups so that it doesn't look as rough around the perimeter, and about the only thing to report is the dash panel cleaned up nicely. As I replaced those 2 knobs that were here with proper diameter knobs that have the single indicator pointer so that we'll know whether we're at 0 or 5 settings. I had to replace the pilot light bulb, and I put in, I'm going to put in a 2 amp fuse, because as we see, that would be, 2.5 times the input current, which might be a little, provide a little greater safety than a 3 amp fuse. We'll see what a 2 amp rapid blow does here. Okay, now let's pull this panel and get to work. Rusty, are you ready to come out of your nest and come out here and help me work on this video? Huh? Come on. Ah, that's my dog. Well, where are you going, Rusty? I thought you were going to help me with a video. Well, removed the rear panel, pulled out the chassis and the speaker. And here's the speaker, as promised. A large ceramic magnet and a super nice cone. It appears the cone is absolutely perfect. It has a doped suspension. Now, I don't know if Jensen did that because it's supposed to be a bass speaker, or if this has been reconed at some time. There's little bug nibbles down here on this felt air cleaner, so I don't know. It's really hard to tell. There was a lot of dirt built up along the bottom edge of the gasket. One problem is a piece of the gasket is missing right here around the perimeter. Fortunately, I had an old 15-inch speaker that gladly sacrificed its a piece of gasket here so that I could restore this one, and I've cut the piece and fit it in here, and now I'll have to glue it in. Then the speaker will be essentially perfect. Okay, the new piece of gasket's installed, and while the glue dries, I always use old wooden clothespins to keep pressure on it. We'll set this aside and take a look at the chassis now. Probably to keep production costs down, the chassis is made of fairly thin sheet metal and open on the ends. The ends then are sealed when the chassis fits down over these wooden blocks that have the studs that hold the chassis down passing through them. The problem with split chassis amps like this one is that when you have the preamp or control panel in the ceiling of the cabinet and the amplifier or power amp on the floor of the cabinet, there have to be umbilical cords that connect them. These are 3 shielded cables. 2 of them are to and from the tone control. The other will be from the 3 instrument inputs. Over here we'll have the yellow wires. Those are for 6 volts up to the pilot light, and then this zip cord AC wire that is going to run up to and then back from the on-off toggle switch. The main problem these cause is, besides making it difficult to remove the chassis very far from the cabinet, is that you have these long runs with signal running through them, and they have to be very well shielded, or you can develop all sorts of hum or even radio frequency interference. In this case, because the amp is so quiet, the shielding here must be adequate. Well, this is my first glimpse into the chassis, and I have a few observations to make. Number one, the material is rather flimsy. I believe it's 20 gauge steel. I wish they'd used 18 or even 16 gauge. Number two, the can capacitor that I noticed externally has not been replaced with another can capacitor, but with separate axial electrolytic capacitors, which is all well and good, but when I looked at the schematic, there were 2 20s and 2 40s. What I see here is 4 20s. So I'm thinking either they used a different schematic or they skimped, and instead of putting in the 40s, they put in 20s, in which case I'm going to put it back to the 2 40s as the schematic recommends. Some other observations: the original cord is present in good shape, but it has some tack-on dime store replacement plug. The high wattage resistors show no evidence of heat, and the depth capacitor is intact and residing right down here, lurking behind the 50 ohm resistor. With regard to the capacitor replacement, I applaud the fact that he didn't just add the axial capacitors to the lugs of the old electrolytic, but wired them into the circuit. But then he left all this jagged wire and bad connections down here, which are rather unsightly. Well, now it's time to get in here with some instruments and start testing the capacitors and resistors and seeing if anything in here needs attention or replacement. Hey Jack, you want to come and help me with this amplifier video? No, guess not. Okay, I just installed a 3-wire grounded power cable and plug. And people ask me about the right way to do this, so let's take a look here. The black wire is going to be the hot wire from the wall receptacle, and I'm going to run it here up to, in this case, up to the on-off toggle switch and fuse. The white wire is the return, and that's going to go straight to the primary of the power transformer. The green wire, of course, comes around and is securely bolted to the chassis to make sure that it is well grounded. You also need to run through a strain relief or a really snug, even super glued rubber grommet to make sure that the cable cannot be pulled out and put stress on any of these connections. One more wiring tip. This amp has a grounding bus, which is a wire that runs usually longitudinally through a chassis that allows you to have all sorts of places close by to seek ground. In this case, the two electrolytic capacitors, however, were merely brought close to the bus wire, not wrapped around, just brought close, and then jumpered with solder. This is not a good connection. You need to wrap the wires around each other, not just on buses, but everywhere else, and wrap them so that the contact is secure, and then coat them with the solder. The solder is merely to stabilize and preserve the joint, not to make it. I made a video about how to identify power transformer leads, but I still get inquiries. Let's just have a brief review here using color coding. Twisted black leads are going to be the AC for the primary. The green is almost invariably the 6-volt filament leads. Red is going to be the high voltage that's going to the rectifier. The yellow will be the filament voltage for the rectifier. There's 2 center taps. The red and yellow means that it's the center tap here for the high voltage. The green and yellow will be the center tap for the 6-volt output. And almost without exception, the 2 center taps will be securely grounded. Out of curiosity, I checked the ESR values on the 4 connections from the CAN capacitor that was replaced. And all of them came out rather high, 7.9, 8, 9 on one of them, whereas on a 20 microfarad capacitor you would expect around 1.4, something like that. So it does appear that the CAN capacitor was failing and did need to be replaced. By comparison, you can see where I've hooked onto a new 20 and it reads at 1.2. So the CAN cap values were high. Okay, here's the chassis finished. Now I put 2 22s in parallel to get the 40, the original 20, and 20. It has the 3-wire grounded cord. I've double checked all the connections and values of the components, and everything seems to check out pretty well. Now, since I just doubled the value of the first 2 electrolytic capacitors, from 20 to 40, it brought to mind a question that's arisen several times, and that is, does increasing the values of the electrolytic capacitors tax the power transformer on startup? So to address that issue, I've connected an AC ammeter across the hot wire that is going to run to the power transformer. And I've discharged all the filter capacitors. So let's monitor the current that flows into the amp on startup and see what type of pattern we see and if there really is any threat to the power transformer. Okay, here we go. First blip up to about 0.7, that's charging the filter capacitors. Now it's going to drop off a little bit until the tubes heat up and start conducting, and then we'll reach our operating amperage for this amp of slightly less than 1 amp. So I believe the 2 amp fuse is probably appropriate for it. Also, you notice that that influx to charge the electrolytic capacitors was really not all that great. One last test before we start listening to this thing operate, and that is to check the tube bias. These are RCA 6L6GB tubes. GBs operate at completely different values than GCs, so you have to be very careful to determine which type of tube you have. The maximum dissipation for GBs I've seen range from like 19 to 23 watts. I measured the plate dissipation by 2 methods. First, the voltage drop across the cathode bias resistor, And secondly, the voltage drop across the two primary windings of the output transformer. After deducting 5 milliamps for the screen current, I came up with 19.5 watts of plate dissipation by the bias resistor method and 20.3 watts by the output transformer method. Both are at the max if you believe 19 and just under it if you believe 23 watts. Jack, are you going to quit riding that mop and come and help me with this video? No? Okay, I'll go get Rusty. Okay, let's start off with it in its original condition with the new filter caps and some wiring cleanup, but no cathode bypass capacitors. How about a little high-end riff here that seems appropriate for the Elvis amp? Okay, now the cathode bypass capacitor is connected in parallel with the bias resistor for the 6L6s. And everything else is exactly the same. Okay, let's really do a side-by-side. This is with the capacitor in place. Okay, let's discuss what we've seen and heard here. First off, I thought the amp sounded much better today with the 40 and 40 electrolytics rather than all 20s. So I think that really helped it. It seemed to fill out the sound and give it a little more low end. Secondly, I did sense some improvement with the 50 microfarad bypass cap on the 6L6s. It wasn't as dramatic as I expected, but it seemed to me like there was some increase in gain and that the sound was definitely fuller, a little better bass response. I just like it better. I also tried a 100 microfarad cap with the 6L6s and found no change whatsoever, no improvement over the 50. And I also tried it on the 5879 and really couldn't tell any difference with or without. I also noticed a little bit of crackling going on in the background, which I attribute to the AC toggle switch. It seems to me like the contacts might be a little dirty. I'll either clean them or replace the switch. So that's it. I'm going to install the 50 microfarad cap and then button everything up, take it in, and try a little sound check inside with a lot better acoustics. Jack? You gonna quit riding that mop and get out here and help me with this video? Come on. I'm gonna go get Rusty if you won't help me. Okay. Well, we got the mighty K720 into the amplifier room in the house and got it looking pretty good. And let's plug it in and see how it sounds. I'm going to plug the guitar directly into the K amp and then play along with a backing track that's going to play back here on the Harbinger speaker. to be honest, it sounds kind of boxy to me, not a lot of treble response. And there's several possibilities. I think at the top of the list is the speaker. It is a bass speaker, has a very stiff suspension. It resonates at a very low frequency, and it's probably not really appropriate for guitar use. Also, the grill cloth's a little dense, and there might be some modifications I can make on the chassis. If I do come up with some dramatic improvement in the high frequency tone, I will definitely post a video and explain how I did it. Now, Rusty's been working on this mysterious blues overdrive pedal, and he insists that I try it with this amp. So let's see how it sounds. Well, I guess even a bass speaker can be awakened by a stout enough overdrive pedal. Well, that's about it for this part 2 video on the K Model 720 bass amp. I hope that the video was helpful and entertaining. I appreciate the time you spent watching it, and that you will join me again in the near future. Bye for now.